My name is Benjamin Day.
And I am Jillian Mason.
Oh, and this is the Medicare for All podcast, the podcast for everybody who needs healthcare. Well, we'll have to get to that super low-key introduction of yourself in a minute, Jillian. But this episode, we're going to be talking about the midterm elections, obviously, that have mostly wrapped up. Thanks again, Georgia, for the endless runoffs that you keep giving us every 2 years. But aside from that, we mostly know what happened in these midterms. Now, you have probably heard kind of the national narrative about how they went. Democrats did surprisingly well, given how parties in power usually take, big losses during the midterms. And particularly when Biden had such low approval numbers this past year. But what about healthcare? Despite the relative success of the Democrats overall, they did lose the House. So there will be a split Congress for the next 2 years, which in all likelihood means, no major pieces of legislation moving forward. That can, for good and for bad. So we just get these tiny windows in American history where things can actually happen. So that will change our organizing focus a bit at the grassroots level for the next 2 years. But right now we want to talk about how healthcare, not how Democrats and Republicans did at the ballot during the midterms, and how did the fight for Medicare for All within the Democratic Party potentially impact the elections? Stay tuned. We have kind of surprise ending on that one. So, Jillian, you are sounding a little less high energy than you usually are.
Just a little bit. I'm not feeling so good today, Ben. Speaking of healthcare,
you sound better than I imagine you sounding yesterday. Where you were off the grid.
True. I've been struggling. My tummy is a little queasy. So the big challenge here is that we are going to have a half-hour conversation about electoral politics, and I have to not vomit during it. So,
okay. So I take my job very seriously here. We're going to make this a highly palatable, bland diet of politics.
Yeah, that sounds just about right. So anyway, so we're gonna get through this. We're gonna soldier through this. But I am gonna need you to kind of cheer me up a little bit, right? So tell me a little bit about what some of the wins were for Medicare for All in this election.
Okay, absolutely. And actually, there's a lot of good news, I think, to talk about in the midterm elections when it comes to healthcare. Some of it specifically Medicare for All, but some of it sort of more broadly healthcare justice-y wins. So let's start with Oregon. Oregonians had a constitutional amendment on the ballot. This was Measure 111. And this creates a constitutional right to access healthcare, affordable healthcare, as a fundamental right. This will be the first state that adds any kind of right to healthcare to their constitution. So it's kind of a major win. There are some caveats I want to insert here, though.
Why do you want to insert caveats? That sounds so nice.
Well, don't get your stomach upset. This is a win, and it's going to be. Actually, before I commit to saying it's a win, it has been called a victory in a bunch of news outlets we noticed online. I'm just looking at the Secretary of State website, and there's not quite 65% votes in, and it is very close. It's like 51 to 90% to 49%. So I assume that the people who are calling it know what they're doing, but it's a very close, looks like probably a victory in this case. Now, the one caveat, and this is not my caveat, this is actually a caveat that was in the ballot question itself. It says state must ensure affordable healthcare access, but balanced against requirements to fund schools and other essential services. So there is this kind of loophole for the legislature to try and weasel out of providing healthcare as a right. A number of states have tried to do this, including Massachusetts, where you don't mention Medicare for All, you don't say exactly how you're going to do it, but you try and get the right to healthcare established and a legal obligation for the legislature to implement it. And then you
the thought is, right, that if something is a right, like the government actually does have to guarantee somehow that people have access to it, right?
Exactly. I think there's two ways of thinking about it. One is that Medicare for All is really the only way you can afford to provide healthcare as a right. You can try to provide healthcare as a right with this commercial, all the for-profit middlemen and stuff, but it's much more expensive and probably not affordable. And also, it just creates an organizing opportunity for the Medicare for All movement, right? It's like the legislature has to do something to meet this obligation. Big organizing opportunity. So that's always a good thing, assuming that we do a proper campaign. But this little loophole language might let them weasel out of it, but it also creates a little bit of sort of legal leverage, I think, if they do nothing at all to try and sue them in court for not having protected the legal right of citizens. So that one's an interesting one.
That's
also
not bad. That's not bad.
Yeah.
Do better though. Tell me a story that doesn't have a caveat.
I'm going to keep working it. I'm going to keep working all the angles here. So no caveat here in South Dakota, for example. Voters approved Constitutional Amendment D, which expanded Medicaid eligibility this is under the Affordable Care Act in South Dakota. Finally, this is it should have been that all states were required to expand Medicaid, but then the Supreme Court ruled that they couldn't do that shortly after the ACA passed. We thought the Supreme Court might strike down the whole law, but instead they just struck down the part that most helps low-income people. Thank you very much, Supreme Court. But the vast majority of states have now expanded Medicaid. I think there was 12 left who had not expanded Medicaid, including your lovely state of Texas. Yes. And now there's only 11 left. And I feel like every election cycle kind of chips away at this. So,
I just want to take a moment to talk to my fellow Texans directly, right? Texans, one thing that we all have in common is that we really fucking love Texas, right? Like Texas is a great place. We call it the great state of Texas, as it were. And people say that without irony. Guys, nobody says that about South Dakota. Nobody's like the great state of South Dakota. South Dakota, listen, if South Dakota can do this, why can't we, right? Why can't the great state of Texas do it if the mediocre state of South Dakota can?
Medicaid expansion in Texas would probably be like covering a whole nother country for universal health care. Texas is so big. So this South Dakota expansion is going to cover probably about 65,000 new residents in South Dakota. So anyway, this is, I think Texas doesn't have ballot initiatives. Is that why we haven't seen it yet in Texas? I'm not joking. Is that true? I think it's true, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have like a lot of really good barbecue, but democracy is kind of in short supply.
Tough one. And let's acknowledge ballot initiatives get used against us too. They get used by corporations to do right-wing stuff. It's not a full, always goes well for working people. But in this case, another huge win. You look at a map of the states that haven't expanded Medicaid now. It's basically just like the Deep South. Texas,
it's all the Confederacy, right?
Pretty much, yeah. It looks like the map of slavery, which is sad testament to how much things have changed. So I'm going to ask you about one. I've kept my eye on a bunch of these ballot initiatives, but I wanted to ask you about the Arizona proposition around predatory debt collection. This was kind of a really interesting one in a purple state.
I mean, so as someone who has basically built their entire career on debt, right? It's student debt
and life debt. Possibly.
Also that. So this one actually really got me. So in Arizona, right, voters actually approved something they called Proposition 209. It is the Predatory Debt Collection Act. And basically it cuts down on interest rates on medical debt, and it increases the number of assets that are protected from creditors, right? Awesome. Basically this is like, they can no longer seize your house. Amazing. So basically, this started out with a kind of huge problem in Arizona. The average Arizonan with medical debt has $1,900 in collections. And also there's a big racial disparity. Surprise. Like 20% of white Arizonans have medical debt and collections, but when you go to communities of color, that number is up to like 40%.
Wow, holy shit.
Yeah, it's
like the whole fucking state is in collections. Like,
So, I mean, the great thing is that Healthcare Rising Arizona, which is a grassroots labor-backed organization, they got a nice $500,000 from dollars from SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West, to work on this, right? And so they proposed this law, which is amazing and seeks to kind of ameliorate some of that situation. So we know that this was not unopposed, of course, right? So interest groups backed by the collection agencies launched a legal challenge against the ballot initiative. Thankfully, it failed. But so, they waged this great grassroots campaign, and eventually it passed on election day. So it passed by a wide margin, 75% support, which is amazing, which means that in Arizona, interest rates for medical debt, which have been increasing by as much as 10% each year, are now going to be reduced to 3%, which is, still shitty, but much less shitty. And then, houses, right? Your house, your household furnishing, your bank accounts, and your vehicles, right? They wouldn't be allowed to repossess those things, medical debt collectors. So that's pretty dope. And we can see, like, if we compare it to like some of the other ballot measures, right? As opposed to like the Oregon measure, right? You got this like highly specific, concrete policy changes, right? That are going to come out of it, which is awesome. That being said, right, unlike the Oregon measure, it doesn't really address the actual, the kind of core problem, right, which is that healthcare costs are too damn high. And so this is definitely something that's going to be a really great harm reduction measure for Arizonans, particularly Arizonans of color. And it's good news in general, I think, for folks who think that medical debt is killing America. But yeah. It's, what? It's a great thing. I'm just going to go ahead and say it's a great thing.
And thank you for keeping this going while all the power in my house just went out. So my screen went down, my microphone went down. I tried to like reopen the laptop, and things are back up and running just in time. But I mean, I was just blown away by the basically how almost half the state is being destroyed by medical debt and is in collections at the beginning of the story. And I like this type of organizing so much better than the other type that we see a lot in progressive circles, which is let's buy medical debt from the debt companies, which also very nice thing to do. It's more falls under like charitable work, I think, to me, than structural reforms.
Yeah, it's a form of mutual aid. Yeah,
right.
People should know that, right? Like it's not like
right.
debt jubilee, all of that stuff, right?
Yeah,
that's a form of mutual aid, which requires organizing, but it's not political organizing.
Right. Yeah, and I know that a lot of countries actually, obviously this collections couldn't happen at all under Medicare for All because you don't have to pay for your health care. It's only collected through taxes. But I know that countries that do have universal health care often do things like this around education debt, even for folks who leave the country to get education, that you can only have like 1% of your income collected for student loans over the course of your whole life. Things like that, which I imagine would be sweet for one Jillian Mason. So.
yeah. We're mostly reviewing legislation that would benefit me.
Right. Yes. I'm all in favor of that. Yeah.
It is making me feel a little better here.
You should move to Arizona.
Maybe so. Maybe that's what's next for me. Shout out to Gary Grundy, my friend in Arizona. I'm going to come visit you soon.
And Ken Kenegos, former president of Healthcare for All Texas, who also moved to Arizona, is now an activist in Arizona.
Delightful. We love Ken. That's awesome. Shout out to Ken too. Regardless, let's bring this closer to your home, Ben.
Okay.
Because one of the most exciting news to come out of this election, right, was these non-binding ballot policy questions in favor of Medicare for All that passed in 20 House districts in Massachusetts.
Yes. So this was really exciting, including my own state representative district. I worked on my district getting this question on the ballot.
Can I just pause for a moment to say that this is actually one of the ways that we sort of got to know each other initially, was doing a kind of similar initiative in
Probably
2012, I think.
Yeah, I think I hate to age us, but it might have even been longer than that, because I know I ran a bunch when I used to run MassCare, the Massachusetts Medicare for All group. And we did a round of these ballot initiatives in 2008 and 2010, if memory serves. It could be 2010, 2012. But anyway, so this is like a tool. This is a policy tool that most states don't have, but Massachusetts does, and it's really nice. You can get a non-binding question on the ballot just in your state representative district or state Senate district. And it basically instructs your legislator to support something or to not support something. So it can say, do you want to instruct your state representative to support Medicare for All? So these 20 districts were chosen very strategically, mostly districts where the representative is not supporting Medicare for All so far. And also because of redistricting, there's a lot of maybe there is someone who's supporting Medicare for All, but they're in a more conservative district now. Or maybe there's someone who hasn't supported Medicare for All, but they're in a more progressive district now. So a lot of thought went into it. And I want to give a shout out to MassCare, who ran all 20 of these districts, and especially Stephanie Nakajima, former director of communications for Healthcare Now, current director of MassCare, who really coordinated all 20 of these districts.
I love this ballot question because, you know how it is in Massachusetts, Ben, right? Like ever since the passage of Romney Care, which then later on became Obamacare when it was national, but ever since the passage of healthcare reform in Massachusetts, people have been kind of complacent about healthcare in Massachusetts. And so I love this because I feel like this was not really a big part of the conversation, but the folks at MassCare, right, like managed to really interject it in the conversation and make it an issue, which is like huge and awesome.
Yeah, this is the best way, at least in Massachusetts, it's really easy for all issue-based organizing to be kind of like pushed off the shelf during elections, and people just focus on electing candidates. We also had some big statewide ballot initiatives here that were great. There was the millionaire's tax. There was a ballot initiative to make sure that undocumented people can continue to have driver's licenses, which also was successful. But yeah, this was a great organizing tool in my district, which is the 12th.
Yeah, how did that go? Yeah, so Ben just moved recently from Somerville, which is a respectable place to live, to Milton, which is a very fancy place. So how did it go working on this in your district?
Well, I should say this is not a fancy district. This is a pretty low income district. It has a little piece of Milton, but it passed by over 77% in my district, which is really, really high. It passed in all 20 districts were successful. Medicare for All ballot initiative passed. So next phase is obviously going to be meeting up with these reps, starting to apply some pressure on these reps, getting them on board the bill.
But just in general, what was it like talking to people in your neighborhood about this? Like, how did that go for you?
It's really awesome. I found basically a supermarket that's really central to the district, where a lot of people who live here go to shop. And I camped outside. I mean, me and a bunch of other activists who were kind of working this district, camped outside. We tabled in front of the supermarket, and just anyone who was interested in talking to us, we talked to them and they'd sign the thing. But if you don't do work like this, you can sometimes forget how bad things are for people, and how important healthcare really is just for your everyday person. It's just a great way to meet new people, bring new people into the movement, and sort of get a reality check on how people are faring in the healthcare system. Because a lot of people are really enthusiastic about sharing their stories, talking about what's wrong, and being supportive. So I'm always I have to drag my ass out to go out and door knock or table or canvas or things like this. But you love it. I love it. I enjoy it so much. And I think most people do. You start remembering why you're doing this work. It refreshes your why this is so important and compelling. So I love it. It was also a great new to get to know my new district, the new folks in my district.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm your new neighbor, and I'd like to radicalize your healthcare system.
Yeah, that's exactly how you should probably not do this, but we'll just preach to them. I take a listening, deep canvassing, Jillian. I do deep canvassing.
Of course, Ben. Of course.
Right. Anyway, it was all good news in Massachusetts, and obviously, the ballot initiative is just the first step. We've passed this in many districts where the rep just continues to ignore you and doesn't give a shit what their residents and voters in their district want. So it doesn't like take the organizing out of it. You still have to organize afterwards.
Yeah.
But it is really exciting and it makes you feel good because it's also like the non-binding ballot initiatives. You see how people vote when they don't have like millions of dollars spent on advertising lying to them, because the industry doesn't bother mobilizing against non-binding ballot questions. So you start feeling good about the population. It's like, okay, people understand what's right and what's wrong. It's only when money pours into disinformation that you start questioning America,
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Except for the fact that money is always pouring. Well, whatever.
Yes.
All right. Yes. Fair.
So anyway, Jillian, I hope we're doing a good job so far. These are four good stories, right?
We're working towards it. Yeah.
And
good.
Even though I know Massachusetts kind of allegedly a liberal bastion, but great stories from Oregon, from South Dakota, from Arizona. But I wanted to ask you before we kind of move on from or move on to the electoral stuff and talk about especially about reproductive health, which is sort of a sister organization to Medicare for All and has real important consequences for the Medicare for All movement, how the reproductive rights movement goes. There has been a lot of gerrymandering, obviously. We just went through a redistricting cycle. So what about just how ballot measures and kind of direct democracy has the potential to bypass some of the gerrymandering and things that can impact our elections?
Yeah. I mean, so I'm glad you asked, Ben, because I actually have a lot of experience with ballot questions. And
that's right. Yeah.
And not enough people are asking me about it.
Right.
I think there are a couple of lessons here, right? One is that Medicare for All is actually popular. So when you put it to a vote, we win, right? And that's awesome. That's a great lesson. And in general, direct democracy is awesome. People see these ballot initiatives, though, and I think that they don't realize the kind of organizing that goes into passing them and then implementing them, right? So 100%. Like you were talking about, right? Like there's follow-up here. So I think that a lot of people tend to think of ballot initiatives as like a magic bullet, but the truth is that they're actually, the organizing is really hard, right? So you need to go out there and be willing to organize in many districts that you might not normally be in, right? And then the other thing to remember is just like you were mentioning with the Massachusetts ballot initiative, one of the things that's great about it, right, is that you get to see what people decide when they don't have that interference of that corporate money.
Right.
But the higher the stakes of your ballot initiative, the more you're going to get pushback, the more you're going to get people to fight you. And so in Massachusetts, one of the binding ballot referendums was to augment the state constitution. We called it the Fair Share Amendment, so that we could tax millionaires, right? That's a very high stakes proposition because it would be binding, right? And you saw millions of dollars pouring in from all sorts of different business organizations and rich people groups trying to fight against this law, to the point where they, much like in Arizona, they challenged the legality of the ballot measure, right? So again, this is something you should be aware of. Even if it is direct democracy, there's still plenty of ways for corporations to fuck with you. And also these can be really expensive too. So
no joke there at all.
Right. Look at this Arizona law, right? They were backed by SEIU, which is the Service Employees International Union, right? And they got a $500K grant from them to do the work, which is awesome. But it costs a lot of money to do this kind of campaign, and I think that people need to be aware of that.
With $500K, you could lose most ballot initiatives in most states.
Yes.
It takes it. And And I think this is a good time to pause sort of cautionary tale about ballot initiatives in the Medicare
Oh
for
my
All
God.
world.
Yeah. Tell them
Um,
tell them the story of Colorado, Ben.
Yeah, well, I could tell a few stories. I mean, so I do think there's a temptation, especially when folks have to try and work trying to get legislators to support Medicare for all. And it's incredibly hard, incredibly frustrating, and we all know that these reps and senators who are not backing Medicare for all are not just ignoring their district, basically, are trying to align themselves with corporations, at least on certain issues, and they don't want to, they don't want to disturb health insurance. They don't want insurance companies running against them, throwing money against them, or pharmaceutical companies or hospitals or all of the above.
Right.
So not to rock the boat, they just totally ignore the healthcare needs of their district and even opinions of the district. So I understand the frustration that leads people to be like, let's do a ballot initiative instead. But a ballot initiative is not easier. A binding ballot initiative is not easier than a legislative campaign. It's more expensive in terms of money, and it probably takes just as much massive manpower to win. I remember in California, there was a ballot initiative not for Medicare for all. It was just to let the Division of Insurance review health premium increases and approve or not approve them, which I think like 35 other states already do, including Massachusetts. And most states don't actually use this power at all. They have it. And I remember the healthcare industry poured, I think it was more than 150, 160 million dollars into the opposition.
Sheesh.
Now, I just want you to imagine how much money and resources would go into opposing a Medicare for all ballot initiative in California or just about anywhere else. And we saw this in a big way in Colorado. This was, I'll never forget the proposition because it was Proposition 69. Made for some great bumper sticker material. They might have thought it through a little bit before numbering it.
I mean, maybe they did. Maybe that was the first marketing
right
choice.
And I really appreciate and I like a lot of the activists who worked on this campaign. But they got it on the ballot initiative with like just enough to collect the signatures, basically just enough manpower, just enough resources to get it on the ballot. They had to do some fundraising and pay like some folks to collect signatures. I think about half of the signatures. And then they just got completely destroyed in the general election.
Yeah.
Money poured in from around the country to oppose it. And actually most of the Democratic establishment in Colorado opposed it also. Because it would not have included reproductive health care in the Medicare for all system. So for understandable reasons, many Democrats and people who probably support Medicare for all in other circumstances jumped ship, and it was just absolutely destroyed. I think it lost 79% to 21%, and it gets used. That's a really bad thing nationally. It's bad in Colorado, but it's also bad nationally because it gets used against us constantly. I can't tell you how many times we hear, they tried it in Colorado and voters resoundingly rejected it, didn't want Medicare for all in Colorado, even though there was all these other complicating factors involved. Same thing with Vermont. Even though Vermont never fully implemented Medicare for all, people seem to remember it that way. They're like, they tried it and it didn't work in Vermont. It's like, no, but then you end up in a really weird historical argument. So I'm not against running a Medicare for all ballot initiative, a binding one. But if you do it, you had better have the resources and the really broad coalition and the manpower to win, not just to like barely get it on, but to take on the industry and fight and win afterwards. And I think a lot of activists have no idea the scale and scope of what you have to pull together to be able to do that. So
yes. No, it's true. It's true.
But anyway, that's just an organizing, like what you need to do to be able to win this thing, not to totally discourage people. So let's talk about some more wins. I hope your stomach's feeling okay. We're going to continue the chicken soup of the election going. I want to talk about the reproductive health victories. We've been talking a bit about this here and there, but there was a bunch of ballot initiatives around abortion access following the Supreme Court sort of insanity.
It's true. It's true. Abortion was on the ballot in a couple of different ways, actually, in 5 different states, right? So, in Michigan, there was an amendment to the state constitution that would guarantee the right to an abortion. In Vermont and California, right, there were amendments to the state constitution giving the right to an abortion. And in Kentucky, there was a ballot measure that was actually aimed at denying constitutional protections for abortion. And in Montana, right, there was this
in Kentucky,
wild. So in Montana, there was this law, this ballot measure that folks were trying to pass called the Born Alive ballot measure, which would have required medical workers to provide care to infants born prematurely or in rare instances of surviving an attempted abortion or face penalties. Truly dystopian. So basically, all of these measures, in all of these cases, reproductive rights was the big winner. In Michigan, Vermont, and California, we have amendments to the state constitution. And in Kentucky and Montana, voters rejected those shitty ballot measures.
I don't suppose in Montana, the Republicans, who I'm sure put that on the ballot, would they have continued the healthcare coverage after the child was born prematurely?
I mean, that just doesn't seem to be in the Republican playbook.
Would the medical workers who had to provide this prenatal care even get paid for it?
Doubtful. Doubtful. I mean, I think it's just, it's what God asks of us. We should ask for compensation. Yes. So, long story short,
once you're out of the womb, we don't really care about you anymore. You're on your own.
You that at one point, one of the ads that people were running against, that the Republicans were running against Beto, who is our Democratic gubernatorial candidate. One of the ads actually said, Beto supports abortion up to and after birth. It literally said that.
Not abortion.
Well, anyway, it does turn out, though, that women vote.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Breaking news at 11.
Yeah, so people with uteruses actually do vote, and they're pretty pissed about this. So when you give people a chance to actually vote on these issues, it turns out that people really do think that abortion is healthcare. So that's one for our side.
And big shout outs to the campaigns that I'm sure were behind pretty much all these.
Oh my God. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. All right. So we've got them as one of the big winners. Were there any people winners? Were there any good Medicare for all candidates? How did they do in the 2022?
Yeah, it was absolutely. There were. I think we had a bit of a mixed bag. Obviously, I mean, midterm election, you kind of knew Democrats were going to lose some seats. I mean, speaking of reproductive health, we know that loomed really large in the elections as well. This is probably one of the main reasons that Democrats didn't do as poorly as you would expect them to do during a midterm.
Oh, election. Yeah. Sorry, that was the takeaway from that.
Yes,
I just care so little about Democrats.
Fair enough, and I'm going to give you even less reason to care about them in a moment. So, I want to start with the good news. Good news is we do have some awesome new Medicare for All champions joining Congress this year. Obviously, your neck of the woods, Texas, we have Greg Cesar, who we've done some interviews with him for our newsletter. He is kick-ass legislator, longtime city councilor, and in Austin, and now Congressional District 35 in Texas. We got Summer Lee in Pennsylvania, the state's first Black congresswoman. That's kind of shocking. Good job, Pennsylvania. And making that race even sweeter is that Summer won against a longtime health insurance industry executive on the Republican side. Oh, so sweet. And then we've got Florida, Maxwell Frost, the first Gen Z member of Congress. Welcome, Gen Z, to Congress, bringing Medicare for All with them. So,
he's bussing, to use the slang.
Yes.
Cool.
Reference our Gen Z podcast episode a number of months back. If you really want to see how out of it I am.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Wait, but
Right.
there was this one of the big stories, right, on this election was how the Democrats were spending their money. And this, of
God.
course, ties back to Medicare for All. And Ben has been ranting about this since the election. So we're going to give an opportunity for him to share this rant with you, our listeners, as opposed to just me over staff meeting.
Okay, Jillian, you're going to have to reel me in on this one because
Okay.
this is one of those rants that could potentially go off the rails a little bit. So, and this is kind of like a bad news scenario, I think, because Democrats did have a chance of actually holding the House, which meant that there would have been another opening to pass, if not Medicare for All, some steps in the direction of Medicare for All, holding Democratic control of the House, Senate, and presidency. But that didn't happen. And I want to focus on two rep districts, sort of a tale of two stories, which I think are exemplary about how the Democratic Party cannot get out of its own way and are basically ruining their chances every election cycle, partly just to spite candidates who support Medicare for All and other progressive causes. And I don't think Medicare for All should be a progressive cause. I think it should just be a right cause. But this is how it's lumped in within the Democratic Party, at least currently. So I want to focus on Oregon's 5th district. Now, I was feeling pretty good about Oregon's 5th district because Kurt Schrader, who has represented that district for a long time, one of the worst Democrats in the planet, not a supporter of Medicare for All, and was actually one of the only Democratic opponents of the Build Back Better bill. He literally tried to undermine Build Back Better in the House. And do you want to guess why, Jillian?
Build Back Better kind of undermined itself. It didn't need any help from Kurt Schrader,
Yeah, but mostly on the Senate side, right? We thought it was like the story of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. But
it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
Kurt Schrader did his best to do the same shit on the House side. But unlike actually Manchin, his reasons for opposing it were not around environmental issues. It was actually around protecting pharmaceutical companies.
Hey!
So, Kurt Schrader, ultimate douchebag. He was opposed to negotiating prescription drug costs. And that was why he was trying to undermine the whole Build Back Better thing. So Kurt Schrader loses in his primary. Loses in the primary to a progressive candidate, Jamie McLeod Skinner, a Medicare for All supporter. And Skinner actually, usually in these cases where an incumbent is taking on a progressive challenger, the whole Democratic establishment lines up behind the incumbent. That didn't happen here because people were so sick of Kurt Schrader. So the local Democratic establishment mostly backed the progressive, and actually Joe Biden endorsed the progressive challenger. So a rare case. But bad news when it came to the general election. This is a swing district. It's really a purple district. It can go Republican. It can go Democrat. And McLeod Skinner lost very, very narrowly by 1 percentage point to her Republican opponent in the general elections. So how this is going to be used, right, by Democratic centrists. They're going to say you can't run progressives in these swing districts. You can't run for Medicare for All on swing districts. You have to tack to the center. But there's a hidden story that they don't want to talk about, which is that the Democratic establishment actually controls where money gets spent across the country.
You don't say.
There's a couple of institutions in particular, the DCCC, which I can't remember what it stands for. Democratic Committee for Congressional blah 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 something or other. Everyone calls it the DCCC. I can't even remember what it stands for. And also the House Majority PAC. So these are, funds that raise a ton of money, millions and millions of dollars nationally, and they decide which races to focus, crucial races to focus on. But they are notoriously...
It's the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, by the way. Just for people who are fact-checking at home. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. DCCC, they are notoriously sort of aligned with corporate Democrats. They actively try and undermine progressives at every stage. And they pulled out of supporting McLeod Skinner in the last few weeks of the race. They basically said, we think she's going to lose anyway, so we're pulling out all the money from the campaign. And this is a race that she fell within 1% of winning. So clearly probably could have been winnable with a little of extra resources and manpower. Thank you, DCCC, and thank you, House, whatever it is, the PAC committee. All right, so I just want you to bear this in mind, because this is kind of a sad story for Medicare for All, but could have been one, I think, with a little bit more national support. So now let's look to New York. Now, for folks who follow the elections, you might know that New York is probably the entire reason the Democrats lost the House. It was just like, unlike many states where Democrats overperformed, it was a total wipeout in New York. New York was just a total disaster for Democrats. And I want to focus your attention, Jillian, on the New York's 18th district. Sean Patrick Maloney is a sitting rep, and not only a sitting rep in New York, but is the chair of the DCCC. So is one of these people, one of these very corporate Democrats. I hate calling them centrist because they're not really at the center of the population's opinion. They're not even really at the center of the party. They're just kind of more corporate, I think.
They're bought and sold. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So Sean Patrick Maloney is like poster child for corporate Democrats. Runs the DCCC, and this is the one that pulled its support from Jamie McLeod Skinner's race. Now, like everywhere, New York went through extensive redistricting, and after redistricting, Sean Patrick Maloney wasn't too thrilled with his. Afraid he might lose Republican challenger, so he actually shifted districts to he decided to run instead in a nearby district that he thought was much safer, for a Democrat, leans way more Democratic, not a swing district. And he actually pushed out of that.
This is like when boxers like just try to lose a lot of weight really quick so they can get into a lighter weight class, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Ultimate cowardice. And he actually pushed out Mondaire Jones, who was an amazing Medicare for All supporter who came in 2 years ago, progressive candidate. He said, sorry, we're going to push you out of your district. 'Cause it's safer and I would rather be there myself. So
terrific.
Already profile and courage, Sean Patrick Maloney. Wonderful. So what happened? Sean Patrick Maloney loses his general election. Loses the safe seat that he moved himself into, but the DCCC spent over $6 million on his losing race. This is money that, of course, could have probably pushed over the edge some of the progressives that came really close to winning. But just because, and look, Patrick Maloney, he was attacking the defund the police movement. He got endorsement by the police union, which is basically a guarantee that this guy is a douchebag.
Police unions are basically, that's a hate group with a pension plan.
Sorry, this is coming from two like labor movement people, right? So
they are the
fucking worst. Yes, I agree with you. And then to add a little bit of extra spice, the district he moved out of that he was afraid to run in. He was like, that's not safe anymore. I have to run in a safer district. Pat Ryan, a Democrat, won in that district that he left. It was one of the few Democratic success stories all across the state of New York. So good riddance to this douchebag. I hope we can get rid of him as a DCCC. But people should just be aware that there is kind of a fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. The folks who support Medicare for All do not hold the purse strings, though, nationally.
Yeah.
All the purse strings are held by centrists, corporate aligned Democrats, and they literally try to kind of make progressives lose, even in the general elections, where the fate of the House, control of the House, is at stake. It's like, it's so petty. We see it every time a Democratic convention comes around. We saw it really intensely when Bernie Sanders was running for office. So yeah, there's some cleaning up to do within the Democratic Party. And that's another fight that we're going to have to take on. But also, moral of the story, Jillian, do not ever, ever, ever give money to the DCCC or to the House Majority PAC. Give your money directly to the candidates who you support.
Yeah. What's funny is that all of my, I feel like all of my solicitations from the Democratic Party come from Chuck Schumer.
Right, yes.
And
That's probably the DCCC, actually. He
it's
puts
funny
his name
because
on it. Yeah.
yeah, sometimes the subject line will include a little winky face emoji that forces me to imagine Chuck Schumer winking, and that actually
False
makes me
news.
really queasy. Yeah, no,
Yes.
and like I just kind of want to tell them like the Chuck Schumer
Right.
winking thing is really my main obstacle
Right.
here.
Yeah, and the way this works is if you give to any Democratic candidate, you probably use what's called Act Blue, which is their sort of donation software. And once you've donated to Act Blue, the Democratic Party has your email and your cell phone. And this is why I get like inundated with texts, fundraising appeals from the DCCC, all the organizations I hate. And you can try and subscribing. Good luck. They're going to get you one way or another.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So, Jillian, after going through all this, I realized I had a little bit of a bummer downer, but I kind of see it more as a challenge to take up for us as a movement. How are you feeling? You feeling better about the elections, better about our movement in general?
I mean, I actually kind of am, Ben.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
you're wildly optimistic. I love it. Optimism soothes my stomach. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, like, okay, so this followed a predictable pattern, right? Which is that when we talk about like what people want, right, and vote for, we're talking about the most optimistic parts of our country, right? And the most optimistic kind of narratives for healthcare. And then as soon as we start talking about the Democrats, we have the most nauseating narratives or whatever. So, but you're right. Every challenge is an opportunity in work clothes
to organize.
Yeah. Yes. So basically, we got a lot of organizing ahead of us, but I'm really hoping that because the way that Democrats have spent their money in this election and the really kind of shady gamesmanship, they've been cynical, shady gamesmanship they've been playing. I'm hoping that because that's been a story in the wind down to the election, that people will be a little bit more cautious, and that Democrats will demand more integrity from their party. Because if you're honestly, I just don't, I can't see any Democrat who would think that this is a great way to spend their money.
Yeah. This is sad but true fact is that the Democratic Party is going to have to be won over fully to Medicare for all for us to win this thing. And, we don't have to do that by fighting within the Democratic institutions, like, DCCC and all this shit. I think we just need to elect Democrats that support Medicare for all, or move those who don't into supporting positions. So our work is just going to be beginning. And we'll talk, in a future episode about what does the next 2 years of grassroots organizing look like, given the new political landscape. It does look a little bit different with a split Congress than it does when one party has control. Spoiler alert, it doesn't look dramatically different, but it looks a little bit different. But for now, it was actually great. Yeah, I agree with you. It was great to see so many healthcare wins, especially on the ballot across the country. It gives you more hope. So
yeah. I just want to take a second to thank some of our regular listeners who join us on these podcasts. A lot of you listen to this on your favorite podcasting platform once it's been edited, but some folks do tune in to watch us live. And in particular, we've got 2 people named Furbs, Furbs, and Torrential Rage. So
watch like every episode.
Yeah, on YouTube, and we love you, and thank you so much for commenting, and we really appreciate you, sticking with us here. And also, I wanted to give a shout out to our show writer Jerry Katz, who's watching right now.
Getting a head start on the show notes. We got to finish by Thanksgiving, Jerry. So. All right. And on that note, I hope everyone has a great holiday break coming up later this week. I want to end by thanking the podcast team. Our podcast manager is Angelique Davis. Our researcher for this episode was Sophia Simeon. Our show notes writer was Jerry Katz. And our audio editor was Christian Brandt. So don't forget to like this episode. Subscribe to the Medicare for All podcast on your favorite platform. And this show is a project of the Healthcare Now Education Fund. If you want to support our work.
Say this part really slow.
If you want to support our work, you can donate at our website.
Yes.
healthcare-now.org. So thank you so much, everyone. Hope we have a great rest of your year and holidays. Take care.
Stay safe and stay dangerous.